You are listening to the Composing Trust podcast by Culture Solutions, a series on European cultural action with the world. Is Europe still attractive? How is it perceived outside the EU? How do Europeans promote culture together in the world and with which partners? What have they learned together? What is their experience? Our Composing Trust podcast series will address these issues. Welcome to you all. My name is Damien Helly, the co-author of this Composing Trust series by Culture Solutions. In this first episode, with our general coordinator Hiba Touiri and our co-founder Felipe Basabe Llorens, we exchange views on why we at Culture Solutions have decided to launch a podcast series on EU international cultural relations.
Welcome everyone, this is Hiba Touiri, General Coordinator of Culture Solutions. Today, we are very happy to launch our Culture Solutions Composing Trust podcast series by Culture Solutions, the innovation group specialized in the cultural relations of the European Union. To do so, we have invited the founders of Culture Solutions, Felipe Basabe Llorens and Damien Helly. Felipe, you have been working in cultural affairs and cultural diplomacy for 30 years, managing EU funds and programs as head of budgets and audits, mostly for Spain. You know the world of culture institutes inside out. You have also been an active member of the Allianz Kulturstiftung and the Fundación Santa Maria. You have global experience of cultural relations and diplomacy. I would like to address the first question to Felipe. Felipe, how was Culture Solutions born in 2018 and what are its goals?
Good morning, everyone. Culture Solutions way back in 2018 was actually the result of a casual meeting on the social media. Damien Helly and me, we met on LinkedIn, and it was in fact the meeting of two people passionate for culture and for international relations. It was in that framework that Damien was conducting a feasibility study on the need of a new platform, a new social group, a new initiative in order to help support the idea of culture in the international relations of the European Union. We have started from scratch, and it was a wide sheet that we had to fill in and start working on, and actually has become a personal friendship and a professional friendship. Culture Solutions from the very beginning meant to reflect on the relevance of culture in the international relations of the European Union. So this is as an observatory to analyze and follow up the events and recent developments. At the same time, we wanted to open space for dialogue and exchange, and also a platform for the transfer of know-how sharing and training in this field was from the very beginning a very strong need that we felt in most of the stakeholders we talked to.
Thank you, Felipe. Now my next question is addressed to Damien. Damien, you have a PhD on EU foreign and security policy. You dedicated several years of your career to the former Soviet Union and Africa in particular. For the last 10 years, you have worked as an independent cultural advisor and evaluator globally. In 2014, you were one of the 4 independent experts recommending an EU strategy for cultural relations as part of the European Parliament's preparatory action on culture in EU external relations. So, Damien, what interests you most in Culture Solutions and on which topics do you think we should produce podcasts?
Thanks, Hiba. What I like with Culture Solution is that it's a unique organization in the European cultural landscape. It is a group, it is not a network, it is a small group of experts. Some are senior, some are junior. It is small and therefore it is agile. It can change quickly, it can adapt. It is independent and it produces commons. So it produces knowledge and services that are accessible for free for all those who care about European cultural engagement worldwide. Now, the audience may wonder why we do a podcast now in 2023, while there are now so many podcasts online. For me, it is some sort of participatory way of doing research. It's a way of opening spaces for dialogue on the role of culture and the arts in the world in times of growing conflict and crisis in Europe. So it is dialogue that is at the core of Culture Solutions mission. So it makes sense to us to actually go this way with the podcasts. And podcasts can be combined with written research products while offering some lively content for our audiences. And this year, in 2023, I think the Culture Solutions podcast should talk about the practical experience and daily business of European cultural relations in the world. Things like the various ongoing and upcoming European artistic and cultural programs, funding opportunities, some focus on specific sectors like digital regulations, museums, youth, and also what is happening in certain regions in the world like Asia, America, or specific countries. So the idea is to listen to the views and experience of artists, digital professionals, cultural managers, European Union representatives, diplomats, researchers, and so on. And I really think that our podcast can make a difference by giving a voice, and a critical and constructive voice, to those who actually do concrete cultural work on a daily basis to build trust and to create confidence in international relations when there are the climate crisis, inequalities, all sorts of conflicts, wars, the pandemic, now inflation. So we do need these dialogues. And because of the war in Ukraine, I think the podcast should talk about the impact of this conflict in particular and on how Europe is perceived in the world after this conflict. We will start the series with a podcast on cultural heritage protection in conflict, for instance. And other topics will include decolonizing cultural practices, EU digital and internet regulation, what it means for cultural relations, climate action, plenty of fascinating topics.
Thank you, Damien, for those interesting themes. Now I would like to hear Philippe's view on this question of podcast themes. So, Philippe, what do you think?
I can only stress what Damien has just said, that the added value of this series of podcasts by Culture Solutions should rely in that it is a neutral tribune where we want all possible stakeholders to have a voice, not only policymakers, not only professionals of culture, but also creators. And creators not only from the European Union, because the EU strategy for cultural relations targets creators outside Europe, we really must engage and listen to what they have to say. And on the other hand, being so flexible and agile, we can not only rely on topics very closely linked to recent developments, but we can also afford to become, through this series of podcasts, an institutional memory of the European Union and its progress, because in the last years, it is amazing what has been done and advanced in the field of culture in the international relations of the European Union. But also, we should focus on specific artistic disciplines. We should address other side issues like environment, climate change, digitalization, and very specific and professionalized areas of the world of culture in international relations, such as monitoring and evaluation, financing, processing and programming. The main issue of the cultural dimension in the process of European integration in its international dimension is changing now from process to substance. And that's what we want to address also with this series of podcasts. This is let's go, let's discuss, let's criticize, let's debate, let's propose. We want to open the floor to everyone who has something to say on this in an open, honest and free environment.
Great. Thank you, Felipe. Now let's see, whom does Damien consider to be the main audiences of Cultural Solutions and of the Cultural Solutions podcast series?
Culture Solutions is made for professionals and to some extent for the broad public. You don't really need to be a fan of the European Union to listen to our Culture Solutions podcast. Actually, if you don't know or even don't like the EU, listening to our podcast is a good way to understand who Europeans are and why they are interested in cultural and artistic affairs. I would say what we do is a bit like a B2B non-for-profit organization and think tank. We address mainly those who can directly make a difference in EU external cultural policies and international cultural relations. So in a nutshell, I would say there are three profiles we target. The first one is the policymaker. These people need to know what is going on in cultural affairs, but they don't have time. They need tips on how to develop effective cultural programs. In general, they know how the EU works, but not always. And they need to learn about current artistic practices and cultural policy work. The second profile covers the creative and cultural professionals. So these are artists, cultural managers, cultural lobbyists in Brussels, any people or country partnering with the EU, cultural institutes, but also academics and students. Usually, they're looking for funding to develop cultural relations. They are keen to implement programs with EU money. They know the cultural work, but they don't have all the information they would need on how the EU bureaucracy works. Or in the case of academics, they study specific topics, but there are aspects of EU cultural relations that they would like to know more about more deeply. For instance, the latest political decisions made on culture, the role and certain positions of EU member states, for instance, Germany or Slovenia, what they have been doing lately. They are usually curious about latest funding initiatives or the latest research or reports that have been published. And finally, the third audience that we target is the broad public. It is content for citizens and people from all over the world who are curious about cultural exchanges and cultural relations, who are interested in the arts, and who care about good relationships between people and continents.
Thank you, Damien. Felipe, anything to add on Cultural Solutions audiences? And what are you trying to achieve with the podcasts?
Subsequently to what Damien said, I think that the program of this podcast series is going to adapt to these three types of audiences. So in the beginning, we will start with very specific subjects addressed to some of these specific groups. And once we have established the good rhythm and we have identified really who our base and who is interested and who wants to jump on the project, we would clearly start addressing other issues more linked to the general public ideas or wishes or interests. And this links with the idea that why is this podcast series so important to Culture Solutions? Not only to increase our visibility, not only to widen our group on our basis of members, but also because we are convinced that it will have an impact on the quality of our work. Because the more voices you listen to, the more voices you add to the chorus, the best the melody and the symphony will come up. So basically, what we want is to have new partners on board that bring us the energy, but also the perspectives, but also the needs for the future development of the series. So to all of you who are listening to us, do not hesitate to jump on the project, to suggest new ideas, to propose, because you can also be a protagonist of our series.
Since you've mentioned melodies and symphonies, Felipe, perhaps to finish, we could share an artistic reference that we'd like to mention as source of inspiration for this Cultural Solutions podcast series.
So, when we talk about dialogue, art, culture, and Europe, we might always try to think of all those famous artists, painters, musicians, and writers that have contributed, to the expansion and also to the dialogue between Europe and other parts of the world. But I would like to think about someone from the old Middle Ages, someone from a small island in the Mediterranean, Ramon Llull, who gives its name to the Cultural Institute of the Catalonian region. And he was a philosopher in the 13th century who actually opened a school to all three religions, to the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish religions, who opened the dialogue to scholars from both sides of the Mediterranean, because it was open for discussion of ideas from all worlds to make a better world. The famous Llibre d'Amic et d'Amat, so a book on the beloved ones and the friends, is a good summary of how Europe could actually be a basis for dialogue, for the understanding of different peoples and different cultural traditions. So Ramon Llull, why not 8 centuries later, could still provide us with a good reference and example.
And you, Damien, do you want to share with us some artistic references or sources of inspiration for this podcast series?
Yeah, actually, I have chosen to speak of 2 references that summarize very well the cultural challenges of our time, in my view. The first one is the Beyoncé and Jay-Z music video shot in the Louvre Museum in Paris in 2018. I think it summarizes very well the contemporary cultural challenges of Europe. On one side, it's about the power of digital technologies mixed with artistic creativity to reach global audiences. But on the other side, it is also about Black artists, feminism in a decolonized world, and new ways to revisit our shared cultural heritage in a very emblematic European museum. So there's so much to think about in this video as a source of inspiration. And the second reference I wanted to mention is the concept of Bauhaus. It started as a European approach of design and then art in a critical way, and then it has been developed all over the world. Initially, it was very much associated with modernity and industry, and it's now being reshaped by the EU to address climate change, which is the challenge we should all work on and tackle. So for me, revisiting the Bauhaus is also a lighthouse to be aware of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe and Damien. We have reached the end of this first episode, and we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for listening. Join us on our journey to compose trust.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of our Composing Trust podcast by Culture Solutions. If you liked it, you can subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platforms and contact us at culturesolutions.eu.